Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. This is the second audio-only version that I've done in about 120 episodes. The first one was on woke education, and I had a school teacher on who was legitimately scared to talk about what was happening in his progressive Los Angeles school. So he covered his identity and voice and everything like that. And my episode today is something kind of similar. I have on an author, AB Kelleher, who wrote a sci-fi novel called Little Green Pills. His background is he's covered technology and national security stuff for more than 15 years. He's been all over the place on Newsweek and Forbes and CNN's security clearance, Quillette, New York Times, Washington Post, Yahoo News, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's been on CNN, CBS, National Geographic, and all of those kinds of things. These credentials are really impressive, and we're going to get to why that matters. But before he was a professional writer, he worked for the federal government for 16 years. He was enlisted in the U.S. Army, and then he worked for one of those three-letter agencies in the U.S. intelligence community. And he worked in intelligence specialty, where understanding human psychology and motivations is really important. So AB Kelleher is his pen name, and the reason he's using a pen name and the reason why he's covering up his identity is because of the topic that we're talking about, and in a similar way to talking about wokeness in schools, and how my friend at the time, or the guest I had at the time, was legitimately scared that he would lose his job if the podcast got out. AB is in a similar situation. So can you tell us a little bit, welcome to the show, by the way, but can you tell us a little bit about you and why you feel it is necessary to use this pen name and cover up your voice and identity and things like that?
Well, first off, Will, glad to be here. Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
The novel Little Green Pills is on the touchiest of topics anymore,
which is that there are sex differences between men and women. And so what was non-controversial 5 or 10 years ago, it's the kind of thing that gets people fired anymore. One of the people I interviewed for this was a kind of a renowned evolutionary psychologist, Jeffrey Miller. And he warned me when I was interviewing him for this book, he's like, look, there's no way you can get a novel about sex differences published as a middle-aged white guy. It's just not going to happen. And the subtext was, if you do, by the way, you may not like the reputational effect. And his prediction was 100% correct. Think of what happened to James Damore when he released his Google memo saying pretty innocently, the reason there aren't more women at Google is because there are fewer women in the computer science pipeline, because they don't seem to be as interested in it, which is 100% true. It's 100% supported by data. That's not controversial to anyone who's looked at it. He was fired for that. Since my book came out, a book on very similar topics, but nonfiction, but there's a tremendous amount of overlap between my novel and the nonfiction book by Carol Hooven, who is a biologist at Harvard who wrote a book about testosterone, and that's central to my book as well. Well, she made a splash. She went on Joe Rogan. She got kudos for saying a lot of stuff that you're not allowed to say anymore or shouldn't be said anymore. And I heard her 3 months ago, I want to say, on a podcast. She has been unpersoned at her job. She still has her job. And, and no one can denigrate her work on the basis of the science, because she's got the science nailed down. But she has been openly shunned. Her colleagues won't talk to her at Harvard at all. And when she's talking about the world she's living in now, there are tears in her voice. So talking about sex differences, even if you have the science nailed down to a fare thee well, it's been incredibly controversial. And for whatever reasons, when you talk about sex differences and things like sexual desire, which is, one of the main themes in my book, it's even more controversial. So that is why I don't want my other work on other topics interfered with by, because it tends to be, you write one controversial thing, and then anything you ever wrote, like, I covered national security. If I wrote something about, the status of ISIS in Syria, somehow that's going to be attacked on the basis of writing something in a different field about sex. So I kind of wanted to keep a bright line between those two. So I guess that's a long way of answering your question, but that's the state of play in the cultural wars, that it's controversial to say there are sex differences, and here's why. And so that was my approach. That's what I'm trying to get across in the novel, hopefully in an entertaining way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like someone like Charles Murray, all he's known for is in all of his life's work is the fact that he mentioned that there are some IQ differences according to race. And then you get all of his work is kind of tainted through that lens. So for you, that has a whole bunch of different areas of expertise. This is just a small, almost like a side gig of being, a sci-fi novel writer. It could taint everything else. That makes a lot of sense. One of the cool things about sci-fi novels is you get to play the what if game. Well, what if? And it's a fun kind of mental exercise. As a history teacher, I do that a lot where I say, what if a war would have gone this way? Or what if this person would have died young? Or what if this invention hadn't happened? Or what if it would have happened this way? And it's a great way to critically think. And sci-fi, your book, which I loved, by the way, is really, it was really great. And I think that what it did is exactly what I am all about, which is critical thinking. It makes you go, yeah, what if? And I don't want to give any spoilers. So I don't know how much to really say, but can you give us just like a kind of a setup to the book and what the idea is? Because then I have a quick anecdote about something that relates to it that was very real, and it connected almost exactly like a mirror image from your novel. What's the basic premise of the book?
Sure. All right, so I can go a fair bit into it without doing any spoilers, but the premise, and this is 100% based on research. As I said, I'm trying to underline sex differences, not in a pernicious way, but to say that they count, and that we need to take account of them when we're setting up the way society works. We can't pretend they don't count, but it started with almost 40% of women at some point in time have reported that they feel like they have low libido. And so one of the ways they've tried to treat that is with testosterone, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work that great because in order to get the effects that they want, they also get a bunch of masculinizing effects. Now, those masculinizing effects, those are actually what trans people who are female to male trans, they want those. They want to grow hair. They want their voice to lower. They want more muscles. They want all those other things. Women who just feel like, I wish I had a better sex drive, they don't want that. So just the setup is, what if they came up with a version of this that gave women a lot of the characteristics, behavioral characteristics of what happens when you take a lot of testosterone, and one of them is your libido goes up very significantly. And it changes the fundamental nature of it. It also makes you more aggressive and has some other changes, or more assertive, at least I should say, but without masculinizing you. So you're not getting full of muscles, not getting all those other things. And so, basically comes down to is, since the dawn of time, men have chased women and women have been the selectors. They are the choosy people. Men are less choosy when it comes to sex. They just chase people and they hope a woman says yes. So kind of the premise is, what if women started, because there was this pill and their sex drive became just like men, what if they started saying yes as much as men asked? And let's just say, I won't say hijinks, because it's not hijinks. There are a lot of dark things in there, but it really quickly starts to destabilize society in both the US and around the world, because we don't, like fish in the sea, we don't understand how much the way society works count on there being sex differences. But when you remove that little piece of wood from the Jenga tower that is society, it starts to topple pretty quickly. So that's kind of the theme of the book.
Yeah, there's so much in it. I mean, essentially what it's calling out is like changing nature. When the birth control pill was invented in 1960, it changed things, because now women could have sex and not think like, oh, I have to maybe carry this handsome dum-dum's baby around forever. So now they can kind of they can be a little bit less selective. But it's not that long ago, that 60 years ago, we haven't really planned for it. And I forget who it was. You might remember, someone was on Sam Harris talking about this, that women are now said in society that it's perfectly fine to be a promiscuous woman and you can go out, but our genetics are not made for that. And a lot of women are like, hey, I can just go out and have casual sex, and then something in them just doesn't feel right, that they emotionally maybe can't handle it. And this is a generalization, and forgive me, audience, but there is something in that men have that, primitive thing of just go out and spread the seed around, and women have to be more selective because they're bound to this baby for a long time to carry it and then nurture it and take care of it, when men can go out and they can they can impregnate 6 people every single day, 20 people, 100 people every single day, where women are kind of stuck with it. But so their emotional connection and their connections in their brain are kind of linked to that. And to upend that after millions of years of development, and then the past 60 years, there's some weird things going on. And I think that there's a lot of men and women who could say maybe in college they were dating a girl, and the girl's like, oh, it's cool, I don't want anything serious. And then feelings get wrapped up, and then they get upset when you're maybe seeing someone else or something like that. It seems very, very common. I see that as a high school teacher and things along those lines. But when you play with nature, you're going up against these 20,000 or plus 30,000 year old, genetics that are essentially unchanged. And there's gonna be some consequences. There's gonna be some reactions that we didn't necessarily account for. And those changes are going to become very, very disruptive. And then your book goes into a whole bunch of things about the government trying to lock this down because the rapid change is so fast. So then there's a whole element of government trying to get a hold on these rapid changes, which I think happens whenever there's a drastic change in society. So you kind of cover what would the natural process be if this happened, if women all of a sudden had this sex drive and had all the positives as testosterone without the negatives, making women essentially more masculine physically with the body hair and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And to your point, disregarding natural preferences and inclinations, there's an old saying that nature always bats last. So whatever you think about, we can just socially construct things because the way you feel, that's assigned at birth, or that's a legacy of the way you've been educated. I mean, that is always true to some degree. No serious person, no serious scientist says that there is not an effect of socialization on how things like aggression is expressed, or sexual preferences or whatever. Those all play a piece. But if the thing is, you're a blank slate, your biology doesn't matter, that's a disastrous policy to try to enforce, because what happens is you try and stuff people in boxes to which they don't fit. And that gets a lot of people pissed off. And half the people are going to wonder, why am I not achieving what I was told I could achieve? And other people are thinking, well, I've achieved what I've told I could achieve, and I'm not happy. And so that goes back to what you're talking about with women thinking they can do hookup culture and being like, well, this makes me feel gross. I'm not super happy with short-term sexual relationships with zero emotional components. I think that's one of the things that, that particular thing wasn't central to the book, but there's a lot of different ways that I go into it between economics. I mean, one of the things that I think was funny, I touch on it, was, one of the reasons that men seek to achieve is they want to attract a mate. And in fact, that was the name of Jeffrey Miller's book, that Dr. Jeffrey Miller, that evolutionary psychologist. One of the reasons he said, you're not going to get any support for this book, was because he wrote a book called Mates, and it was trying to explain how men can attract mates. It's really straightforward, and it's just good, solid advice. What your dad would have used to tell you to do maybe 50 years ago, common sense, get your shit together, get some emotional intelligence. It's actually not terribly different from a lot of the things that Jordan Peterson has said. If women don't like you, it's because you don't have any game. You're not an attractive person. And whose fault is that? But in order to make that point, you have to admit that there are sex differences. And that is just not a popular viewpoint anymore. So Miller was saying, it's like, I got no publisher support for Mate, and you're going to have even less support for this. So don't think that you can get a publisher for this. And in fact, after I interviewed Miller and his then girlfriend and lovely wife, who's also an evolutionary psychologist at the time, he then subsequently, the next thing he brought out was a book that he independently published himself. He's a really well-renowned guy in that field. In fact, he came up with the term and the idea of virtue signaling. And I think if you've ever been on social media, you know it would collapse without people virtue signaling on it. He was the first person who identified what was going on there.
Yeah, no, yeah, I talk about that often. And then not only are women, I'm like, what's going on with my emotions, but I think what happens then is I see, especially young women, they go, there's something wrong with me that I can't just be a casual sex person, because I watch TV and like, Rachel on Friends, she hooks up with different people all the time and she's a strong woman. So does that mean that I'm weak? And the truth is, like, no, first of all, that's a fictional character. And secondly, no, you are actually, you're trying to fight nature. And, any surfer or anything like that will tell you, like, you can't fight nature. As you said, nature bats last, reality bats last. You're up against something. You should just be very cognizant of what it is. I think it was Aubrey Marcus who started On It Labs and stuff like that. And I think he was interviewing a woman who said that something happened where she got a mix up and she unintentionally got a shot of like TRT. And I emailed it to you or something like that. And I actually forget exactly what she said, but I remember hearing her talk about it. And I go, that is exactly what AB's book said was happening.
Yes.
What was happening to the women in the book was it was a little shocking, because it was right as I finished reading your book. And then I watched that woman talk about what she went through. And I was like, oh, I guess AB did his homework, because that's exactly what she said her experience was. And it was really interesting. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, well, her libido shot through the roof.
Yeah.
and to be fair, that didn't even come directly from my research. I mean, it was validated once I started digging into it. But one of the ideas came from, it's now almost 20 years old, but there's a radio show that's been around. It's now a podcast, but NPR, back when I could listen to NPR, This American Life. And they had an episode, and it was all about testosterone. And it was fascinating, because in one, they had what was then pretty rare, which was a female to male transsexual talking about their experience. And so that was fascinating, because they described just a complete shift in libido, how everything about it changed, and it changed within 3 days, essentially. Once they started high levels of T, and everyone in this world refers to testosterone as T. Once you get on the T, your libido shoots through the roof, and even the nature of the sex drive changed. Like, the person being interviewed said it was like before T, when I was just a quote unquote a lesbian, a butch lesbian. That's how they described themselves before T. It's like, when I saw an attractive woman on the subway, I would look at their ankles and think, oh, they're cute. Have like a little story I would tell myself about what if we had a nice date. And then I started T, and then that all went away. And then I would see someone attractive, and my mind would be flooded by graphic sexual images I could do nothing about, and I didn't want, and they don't turn off. And I was like, yeah, welcome to being a teenage boy. That's what it's like. And
yeah. And
they even said that in the interview. I now have much more sympathy for teenage boys.
Yeah, I've been in a high school classroom. This is my 17th year. So like, yeah, it's like, hey, get up and write something on the board. Kid's like, I can't right now, Mr. Rich. It's like,
Exactly.
But what this does, I mean, it's like James Brown, It's a Man's World. I mean, it upends the entire incentive structure for men. That song is It's a Man's World. Men created this and this and this, but it wouldn't be nothing without the love of, a woman or a girl. That idea. Women are the incentive. I can't tell you how many nerds that I've taught over the years that are like, man, girls won't like me now, but wait till I'm a millionaire. Or I'm going to go to med school, and then I'll get like, it is women are the trophy. And I don't mean to objectify them that way, but that is kind of the way that it works. Men, I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about this. Brett and Heather Weinstein talk about this. Men create these games, these competitions among men. And then the one who rises to the top of that hierarchy get their pick of the women. And to change that around, where women are less selective, really upends everything. And it changes everything, because you take away that incentive structure of how do I get girls to like me? I live in Los Angeles. You go down Sunset Boulevard, and all these young guys in Lamborghinis, like, I'm a car guy, so I try and talk to them about their cars, and they don't know anything about the car. They hope that the car will get a pretty girl to ride in the passenger seat. You know, Dave Chappelle had a funny stand-up bit where it was essentially, it's a little crude, I'll try and clear it up, but it's essentially, he said, if you were a homeless person living in a cardboard box, but every morning you had a girlfriend that gave you oral sex, your life isn't that bad. And you wouldn't be incentivized to get out of the cardboard box. And I think that that's accurate. And I think that there's something true about that.
100%. Men are wired to achieve, to attract women. It's not just happening in a vacuum. If you can get a woman, even though you've never had a job better than working as a 7-Eleven clerk and your major off work recreation hours, it's not starting your own business or going to school, but eating Doritos and playing Call of Duty, but you still get women, there's going to be a lot of guys sitting on the couch and playing Call of Duty, and that's all they're ever going to do. You know, it's so weird when you hear that it's like, oh, it's a downside because women don't have equal representation in legislators. They don't have equal representation among CEOs. They don't have equal representation in pick your measure. And it's like, well, yeah, because those are insanely hard jobs and guys are motivated to do it because they're motivated to have status and money and power because those are attractive.
Right.
I don't know a guy who has thought to himself, looking for a mate, I want her to have political or economic power. Guys look for fertility signals and health, not whether or not they're from a family. Now, in societies with arranged marriages, well, then if your parents are doing the arranging, they're going to look for a wife with political or economic power because they're looking for dynastic signals. But individually, guys are looking for attractive females and women are looking for, this is all, of course, written large in generalities. Women are looking for men with status and resources and the other things that say to them, if I get pregnant with this guy's baby, he's going to be able to take care of me.
Yeah. I mean, like you could say like women are underrepresented, but women are also underrepresented in like dying on the job and like extremely risky behaviors too. If someone says like, hey, my cousin's going to jump their motorcycle over a flaming school bus, you're not thinking it's a female cousin. So these massive risk takers, there's a double-edged sword to that. If like 93% of Fortune 500 CEOs are male, well, 93% of on-the-job fatalities are male. Like there is some sort of correlation there between the people who are willing to take these massive risks, the people who are willing to do these really hard, stressful, difficult jobs, and the ones who get the payoff, because it's almost like you're going to die or succeed. And that is more likely to be accustomed to and aligned with your chemical makeup. I mean, also men tend to marry or find a mate that's across, up, or down the socioeconomic. So men will marry a homeless girl or something like that if it fits like if she's healthy and whatever and seems like a good mate. But women seem to only marry across and up. They rarely marry down. Rarely does a woman marry someone who is below them in income and things like that. So all of those kinds of things would get upended. Maybe women would do more risky jobs. And then what would that look like? I mean, there's so many ways that you can kind of like play this out. And I think that's why the book is so much fun is you go over a whole bunch of scenarios, but then your mind wanders after you put it down, like after a chapter or two or whatever you do, and your mind kind of wanders and you go out in the world and you see like, what would it look like if this was going on for real? And that's what I found myself doing. I was like looking at all these different scenarios. I'd be like, oh yeah, then there'd probably be more women climbing those electrical wires right now. And there'd probably be, more women going out and balling the big, like in like a fancy car or whatever it might be. Like, I don't know. They would just change the whole economic system because guys are going to be less inclined to go out and get that Rolls Royce to get the girl because they can just get a girl just for getting one. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, it's so funny. And it's like going back to the sex differences and it being based on desires. There's been a thing going around. Women make 77 cents for every dollar that a man makes. That completely goes away when you control for how much time women spend in the workforce, whether they work part-time or full-time, and the jobs they pick. Like right now, single women actually earn more than single men. And when that changes is when he slips a wedding ring on his finger. And it's not a magic thing. When that changes is he now feels he's responsible and he's got to make the maximum money to take care of a wife and a potential kid. So he stops doing jobs that are about whether or not he likes it, and he goes for the job that makes the most money. That's the miserable job. Those are the jobs you make a lot more money. I mean, look at the kindergarten teacher. That's 98% women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a job that requires, in a lot of places, a college degree. So it's a lot of investment for not much money. You know, you make a lot more being a welder or a plumber or a bricklayer or an oil rig roughneck. And those don't require a college degree, but they're dirty and they're sweaty and they're dangerous. And there's a really good chance you're going to get injured doing those. But guys do that because that's what's going to make them the money. And also the old thing of men being more interested in things and women being more interested in people. So that's going to have economic consequences as well.
Yeah, and as you agree with this, I'm sure, these are generalizations looking across a massive swath of numbers, where my wife is like a shark business entrepreneur and I'm a school teacher. So there's all these, like obvious examples that people who are trying to basically shoot down this kind of discussion points to, but we're talking about across all people, this is what it looks like. And Claudia Golden's work at Harvard is actually really good if anyone is interested in learning more about the gender wage gap and stuff. Her work's really, she goes into a lot about pharmacies and stuff and how important it is for having schedules that are more flexible. Let me ask you, AB, why is this pushback happening? Sex differences are real. Hello?
Yes.
You can measure this hormonally, chemically, et cetera. Why are people suspending this kind of reality? I kind of get it. I've had a lot of trans people on my podcast. I kind of get that because people like Buck Angel, Xander Keg, awesome people. They say when you just say gender's a binary, it's a little complex because there are people, they say there are people like me out there that don't fit very well into that. They say, these are very reasonable people that say, yes, I'm a biological female, but look at me. I'm an old dude who's bald with a beard and body hair everywhere. I'm something, that's the kind of the way that they put it out to me. They're like, I'm something different. So there is nuance here. But this claim that sex differences aren't real when they absolutely are. What is going on with this? Is it just ideological possession? Let's really try and steelman this and try and really understand what it is. Because I'm sure you thought about it a lot.
I have. So one of the other influences that made me think about this, it's a book I picked up about 30 years ago, and I now wish that I remembered the title, but it was something like Sex Matters or Sex Differences Matter. And what stuck with me is the professor who wrote it, he was really kind of aggressive in making his case in the foreword. And I was like, wow, this seems a little bit over the top, man. Why are you going so hard in the paint? And then I get into it and I come to realize it was another shot in an ongoing war. And 30 years ago, understand why when you think back to the time, the 50s, the 60s, when women were fighting to get access to equal opportunity. And so the tack that quite a few of them, by no means all of them, we're taking was that men and women, the differences between us are minimal. If a guy can do it, I can do it. A whole lot of things where they wanted to minimize the sex differences because they wanted to minimize the excuses that chauvinistic guys were definitely using to say, oh, women can't do this. You can't be a fighter pilot. You can't be a boardroom member. You're too temperamental. You're too this. So, there was a vicious culture war going on in those days, and it involved feminism. So now what we have, and I think a lot of the trans phenomenon that we're seeing now, we don't get where we are with the culture war over trans issues unless we had 30 years before this of feminists of a certain kind, not all feminists, but some feminists trying to minimize sex differences because they wanted to maximize opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And you understand why they did it, and it was legitimate, but it's having unfortunate side effects because they went too far. They did things like put out the thing. It's like, oh, you can have a career and a job and you can do anything that you want. And now a lot of women are like, what if I don't want a career, job, and a family? What if I would more like a family? And certain brands of feminism have told women, well, you're a bad woman if you want that.
Yeah.
Or other things. But this is not to do an assault on feminism, there are some waves of feminism, the kind that's strictly pressing for equal opportunity, I fully support. But the ones that say, oh, there's essentially no sex differences, those are socially constructed, that's how we get to where we are now. That didn't happen overnight. That was a decades-long struggle. But even in that book that I picked up, the guy was making the point on why is it important for policy. And one of the things he mentioned was Title IX. And he was saying, all right, look, sex differences and Title IX. Title IX basically says, and forgive me if I screw it up, but that women should have equal access to sports programs. And you can understand why this would be a good thing. The issue that he brought up is, okay, well, the problem with this is not that we don't want women to do sports or girls to do sports. The problem is that young men who aren't enrolled in something that helps them channel their testosterone in a healthy way are savages that are going to cause harm to society. When they don't have something to channel that in a healthy, competitive way, they get up to crime, they get up to all kinds of bad things. So with women, it's a nice to have stabilizing society. You have to do something for young boys because it's dangerous to everyone else if you don't. It's a nuanced policy point that people don't necessarily want to hear. It's like, okay, well, once you understand that, you might think maybe we should put 60% of our resources in to the boys because that's going to keep people walking down the street safer.
Yeah.
So if you understand the sex differences, you can make that kind of argument and it can inform policy. And if you just say, oh, there are no sex differences, that means money's going to be put for other kinds of programs. While they're nice to have, they're not as essential to socializing boys and turning them into responsible men, which is ultimately what society is hopefully doing.
Yeah. I guess I just get frustrated. My situation's interesting because my wife is an entrepreneur. She is like a shark. She loves sales. That's her thing. And she built this business from the ground up, and she has 35 employees. They're all women. They're all these just like, they call it like boss babes. Like they're all just into sales. It's like the mirror, image of like Wolf of Wall Street, all these girls. But what she loves sales, because what she says, because the way I kind of try to explain this to my class is like, there's different ways you could sell a car. You could say, hey, this has 400 horsepower, it does 0 to 60 in this, it has this kind of brakes. What my wife does is she sells a feeling. It's a more feminine way. It's like, imagine driving down the PCH in this car with the wind in your hair. How would that make you feel? It is a more feminine angle, but in that she sells not just to women, she sells the husbands all the time because she's trying to sell them on a feeling. Like how, this cliche of a man can make a house and a woman can make it a home. They are both have their place. They both have value. And I think it's actually disrespectful to the feminine way to say that you have to do things almost like in a masculine way to be successful, because it's not my experience. I've watched my wife be far more successful than my friends with MBAs and stuff like that, because she goes about it in she's a very girly girl. She's in the beauty industry, and she goes about it in a very feminine way, but she's still a shark. She's still a businesswoman. She's still into sales. It's just with a feminine angle. And I guess that's why I get frustrated when she would be told by people like, you have to do it. It's a boys club. You have to go out on the golf course and you have to do this kind of stuff. And she's like, screw you. No, I don't. And watch my paper is green. And I think that that's almost like that's another negative, I think, to this approach is it's kind of forcing women to play a man's game that they are at a disadvantage of, where if you're talking about trying to sell people on a feeling and stuff like that, then I think women have the advantage. And shouldn't we promote that to some degree, or at least alongside the other options for young women?
100%. We talk about status and everything. To reiterate what you've already said, but I'll say it again. We're talking about generalities. Like your wife is an outlier in a good way in that, she's super entrepreneurial and super successful. Obviously, if she's got 35 employees, she's driven to do this. That's typically more male, but that doesn't make her a man.
That's still within the normal distribution. Your wife just leans more to the entrepreneurial than a lot of other women.
She likes designer purses and she married a school teacher. That's the problem.
Right. And from my viewpoint, the last thing in the world I would want to do is sales and do that job. That's my idea of a living hell. That
Yeah.
doesn't make me more feminine or anything. I'm also
Right,
within the
right.
range of normal. We're having a discussion about generalities, but when you're building a society, you do have to take generalities into consideration when you're setting up a thing, when you're trying to figure out what will be good for girls, what will be good for boys. And when you talk about we're not taking advantage of the feminine, one of the books in the research was called The Hour Between Dog and Wolf, and it's fascinating. A fascinating book that I read for researching little green pills, because one of the differences between women and men is because women have less testosterone, they generally take less risks, and they're a moderating force.
That keeps guys from taking excessive risk.
What's interesting is this guy was a Wall Street trader, and then he got his PhD in neuroscience, and then he went back to Wall Street and studied risky behavior. What happens when you get a bunch of guys, and that's one of those things where it's more guys than women in those big Wall Street banks, when they're taking big bets and making big gambles and they win, then they get a shot of testosterone and they take more and more and more. And when that keeps on going, eventually what you get is the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah.
It was a house of cards, and it was a house of cards because there wasn't enough women there to say, are you bleeping crazy? That's literally what the research showed, and that men will go way over the top in these risky spirals, and then when it crashes, they will go way down to the other side, and they won't want to take any risk at all. Women are more moderated, both on the top end and on the bottom end. Their highs are not as high with risk taking, their lows are not as low, and so it's a really valuable break to have. But if we just tell women are like, you should be like guys, you should be taking all these risks, it's like, no, we need them to keep us calm down.
Yes. Yeah, I think that this is just a really important book. Where can people get the book? It's a extremely thought-provoking sci-fi novel. So it makes you just ponder these questions, and especially moving into the 21st century, as you develop this, we are messing with nature in a lot of ways, with the artificial blue lights and, messing up our circadian rhythm, with the stuff going on with gender, with the stuff going on with our divisiveness, and the fact that you can put something out there and millions of people will see it, and we're gone beyond Dunbar's number of tribal numbers and stuff like that. This is all we're really messing with nature, and I think it's wise to do, if we're going to do that, which is fine because that's part of advancement and that's part of progress. But if we are going to mess with nature, we have to do it with caution, and we have to do it with a critical eye. And your book helps open that floodgates. I think it's about a lot more than this controversial element of sex differences. I really do. I think it's about messing with nature as a way to try and advance. And we're so preoccupied. It's like the line from Jurassic Park, so preoccupied with whether or not we can. We're not stopping to think if we should. And I think that this book opens up a lot of those gates. So even if you're a little hesitant or uneasy about the sex difference stuff, I think that it's just a catalyst for critical thinking about us messing with something that's been developing slowly over millions of years. And now we're moving at this rapid lightning speed. And let's do so cautiously. Where can people get the book? Is it on Amazon?
It's on Amazon. You can get a version in Kindle. You can get a hard copy version. And also, we never mentioned it, but I did an extremely unusual thing. I wrote 2 versions of the novel. One has actual sex scenes in it. It's called Little Green Pill, the explicit version. And then there's another version with no sex scenes. It's just little green pills. And confidentially, that version sells way less well.
Yeah, well,
people do want the sex. And that's kind of what I thought when I was writing it. It's like, people are going to want the sex, but I wanted there to be the opportunity for people who wanted to start this debate, maybe in classrooms, maybe elsewhere, and they didn't want to get into the nasty details. Not nasty, but it's actual graphic sexual descriptions in there. So there are actually 2 versions. Little Green Pills explicit version. You can buy a hard copy on Amazon. You can buy it in Kindle, and you can just buy Little Green Pills, just not explicit version, also in hard copy, also as a Kindle. To go back to what you're saying, I completely agree. This is kind of like an opening shot looking at how synthetic biology is going to change us. And we're just getting into that now. We're just getting into CRISPR technology and rewiring genes. And so this is more plausible or more easy to understand because this is straight out of the headlines. This is what women feel like if they take a lot of testosterone. That's what a trans man will tell you. This is what I feel like. It's not too big a leap of imagination to see the personal things. It's then what becomes surprising is when you extrapolate the personal up to the societal level, and then shit starts going crazy. If it's okay to swear here.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, I'm glad you liked it. We didn't get too much into the book. I hope it's entertaining. Part of the things we didn't get into, I'm not going to spoil it, but these little green pills become so disruptive that the government tries,
to the world, not just in America too, to places overseas, because there's a whole different dynamic of men and women, places like the Middle East and things like that.
To the world that the government tries to shut them down. So what do? They set up a new a reproductive health administration, which tries to stop the supply of these pills. And just like every other drug war, it doesn't work out well. So you have hardworking government people trying to do a mission they can't possibly accomplish. Things just get more and more off the rails. That's a big part that we didn't even get into, but I draw on my experience inside the government to be working on something that you get a directive from Washington that says, here's this impossible task, go do it. And then you're stuck trying to do something that there's no way you can do. So that factors in there as well. It's not just about sex differences and gender stuff. I've incorporated war stories or versions of war stories from my own time within the federal bureaucracy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really recommend. I'm not necessarily a big sci-fi person, but I found myself just being really, I'm a critical thing. I love thinking just about things and hypotheticals, and that it just opened up a floodgate for me personally. So thank you, AB, for being here. I really appreciate it. I hope the audience is leaving here just thinking about some of the stuff that we said, and then it can kind of just start snowballing where they start thinking about this, looking at things a little bit, maybe going a little Google search, all that kind of stuff, because that's what this is all about. It's all about critical thinking, seeing things from different perspectives. And I don't think we were interested in knocking the people who were kind of out to shut this kind of stuff down necessarily. It's just saying like, don't be so scared to just think your way through this a little bit. If you want to disagree, that's fine. But I think you're going to fight nature just seems like a losing battle.
Yeah. Indeed. Thank you for inviting me to be on. Well, if people want to write to me directly, obviously, like I said, I'm using a pen name, but I do have an email account. Okay. It's littlegreenpills@mail.com. Not Gmail, just mail.com. So if they have questions about the book, or they buy the book, they like the book or hate the book, and they just want to give me feedback, littlegreenpills@mail.com.
Very cool. All right. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience for listening as always. Appreciate you.